Close to the centre of England, around its historically industrial core, is Staffordshire, a county famous for its potteries, oatcakes and of course the Spitfire. But what are its prettiest towns? To establish this, I've visited them all personally and my conclusions are presented to you in this top 10 list. As per the rules of this series, cities are included for consideration, which adds 2 candidates to the pool, but villages are excluded as there are just too many of them, and that also goes for Penkridge, which looks every bit like a market town, but their own parish council insists it's a village, so who am I to say otherwise? With that bit of housekeeping out of the way, let's get to it. Number 10. We start in the northern end of the county and the garden town of Staffordshire, otherwise known as Biddulph. With a proud industrial history stemming from the opening of a coal and iron works in 1857, which would provide employment for over 1,000 at its peak, Biddulph has the aesthetic of a typical Victorian or Edwardian factory town, not world-beating on the architectural front, granted, but pleasingly cohesive nonetheless. And being situated in a valley surrounded by greenbelt land separating it from Stoke-on-Trent, Biddulph has an altogether more peaceful feel compared to its close neighbour. Number 9. Now to a town on the outskirts of Cannock Chase, not its namesake, but the one on the other side, Rugeley. With the Trent and Mersey Canal running through, and 2 power stations here up until their relatively recent demolition, Rugeley is, historically speaking, an industrial town through and through. And yet, the town centre, with its copious buntings and greenery, still manages to evoke a good degree of old market town charm. One of its most prominent landmarks is the Victorian Rugeley Town Hall, or what remains of it, namely the clock tower, with the rest having been demolished in 1978. In short, a town with perhaps not the strongest architectural heritage, but which still manages to elevate its status somewhat, with a little TLC, and therein lies a message that other town councils will be wise to follow. Number 8. If it's history you want, well, how about the 8th century capital of the Kingdom of Mercia, Tamworth? In 918 AD, Athelflaed, Lady of the Mercians and daughter of Alfred the Great, died in Tamworth, having played a key role in countering the Viking threat to this frontier settlement and the surrounding region. The Normans built upon this legacy with a defensive structure of their own, Tamworth Castle, which can be freely roamed to this day. In cruel disregard to its history though, some mid-20th century tower blocks are visible from the grounds of the castle itself, preventing Tamworth from reaching a higher spot on this list, a visual affront in this frontier town, as it were. Number 7. On the historical side, we're just getting started though, as we turn our attention to the county town, Stafford. Another one of Lady Athelflaed's fortified settlements from the early 10th century, Stafford's vast history is evident in some of its buildings, the highlight of which is almost certainly the ancient High House. Built in circa 1595, this is said to be the tallest timber-framed Tudor townhouse standing in England. This makes its mere Grade 2 listed status rather egregious, and may account for its museum being flanked by a discount shop and a phone shop. Mind you, the museum is well worth a visit. I'm not sure about the phone shop though. But all things considered, and a few modern additions notwithstanding, this is a county town that retains a fair degree of historic intrigue. Number 6. Next is a small town just 5 miles from Alton Towers, Cheadle. At its very centre is this 17th century market cross, an understated reminder of Cheadle's history as a market town, but the 2 main churches are what give it a unique twist. Firstly, on the high ground, in the literal sense, is the parish church of St Giles. Then, a few streets away is a Roman Catholic church, also dedicated to St Giles. With a spire reaching over 60 metres in height, this is Grade 1 listed, i.e. it holds the highest form of conservation status, whereas the Anglican parish church down the road is only Grade 2 listed. Whilst not without precedent in a given town, this is still an inversion of the norm, and to which I'd assume the Pope would approve. Number 5. Now to one of the iconic canal towns of the Midlands, and with one of the best names at that, Stone. So the lore goes that 2 Anglo-Saxon princes were murdered by their father for having converted to Christianity. Over their grave was a cairn of stones, and around these stones a settlement grew. That settlement developed into the town you're looking at. A town whose geographic location on the old London to Chester road gave it a thriving coaching-in industry during the Georgian era, but it was a Georgian engineering feat that took it one step further, that being the Trent and Mersey Canal. With a series of locks here, this is where many of the fine works of pottery from Messrs Wedgwood, Spode and the other big players in neighbouring Stoke-on-Trent were transported over 200 years ago. Such cargo has long since disappeared from our waterways though, as nothing is nothing is permanent. Number 4. And so from a town named after a pile of stones to a town named after a vegetable, only in Staffordshire, the town of Leek. Situated in the heart of the Staffordshire moorlands and just on the outskirts of the Peak District, Leek has a wealth of beauty just among its surroundings alone. As for the town itself, well, in common with nearby Macclesfield over the border in Cheshire, Leek had a prosperous silk trade peaking in the 19th century, with much of the architecture stemming from a similar era. At its core is a very Georgian-looking marketplace with a Victorian cast-iron lamppost and a fair number of 21st century cars parked here, but given the town's inexplicable lack of a railway station, I'm sure you can forgive this last point. Richard Beeching, on the other hand, maybe not so much. Number 3. The first podium spot goes to a town roughly equidistant between Stoke-on-Trent and Derby, Uttoxeter. While other towns in Staffordshire are renowned for potteries, breweries and silk mills, to name a few, Uttoxeter's biggest industrial claim to fame comes courtesy of local man Joseph Cyril Bamford, who you might know better by his initials, JCB. But visually speaking, this town is all about understated architectural elegance at every turn of its windy streets, such as the Church of St Mary with its 14th century tower and spire, helping to keep your bearings around the town centre, or the Market Cross, also known as the Conduit, complete with a tribute to an act of penance performed by the famous 18th century dictionary author Samuel Johnson, who once stood here for hours in the rain without a hat, as punishment for refusing to attend his father's bookstall, about 50 years after said refusal took place. Number 2. Our runner-up spot goes to the smallest town in Staffordshire, home to just over 3,000 residents, Eccleshall. With a church and a market charter both dating back to the 12th century, as well as a medieval castle that's since been converted to a private home, there's no shortage of history in Eccleshall. The town's immaculate high street harks back to its days as a staging post on the London to Holyhead route before the railway era, but as it happens, there appears never to have been a railway station at all in Eccleshall. On the visual front, this amplifies the Georgian aesthetic of this little town of independent shops and former coaching inns. Number 1. As mentioned in the intro, cities are included for consideration, so where better to finish up than the ancient city of Lichfield. With a population of a little over 30,000 today, Lichfield may appear like a small town, especially considering its proximity to Birmingham, being only 15 miles north of the Bull Ring itself. but historically it was Birmingham that was a small town near Lichfield, and Coventry. Samuel Johnson, who I mentioned earlier in regard to doing penance in Uttoxeter, was born in Lichfield. While much is made of his comment of when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life, what's largely overlooked is he was talking about 18th century London, which besides St Paul's Cathedral would be virtually unrecognisable to modern eyes. Johnson's birthplace of Lichfield, however, is a different story, as it remains a lot more faithful to the days of his youth in the early 18th century, which coincide roughly with Daniel Defoe's tour of Britain. On the subject of Lichfield Cathedral, Defoe described it as one of the finest and most beautiful in England, adding that its 3 spires are without comparison in all of Europe. This, among well over 200 other listed buildings, may leave you wondering why Lichfield doesn't get the recognition it deserves. To that, your guess is as good as mine. In any case, that concludes this list of my picks for top 10 prettiest towns and cities in Staffordshire. Do you agree or disagree? By all means let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you'd like to catch up with other counties covered in the series so far, check out the link on the screen now. Thanks for watching and have a great day.